Welcome everyone to The Wandering Jew, mystical musings and inspirational insights from Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. I will mention that tonight is Rosh Chodesh Av, and it's also the Yahrzeits of HaKohen. He's one of the only people in the Torah that it actually mentions when they passed away. Just one second.
Also, Rashi's Yahrzeits today.
Yes, it's Rashi's Yahrzeits today, and tonight is Aaron HaKohen's. Okay, so we are starting a new section in Wandering Jew. This is called Torah and Commandments. Some great material here. For those who have the book, it's, well, there's not even a page number. We'll call it 113. Has a big 3 on it for the beginning of a new chapter, Torah and Commandments. So the first tweet that he has here is, Moses received the Torah on Sinai, the lowest of all mountains. To receive the Torah, you have to be both a mountain of goodwill and a humble hill. As we've seen throughout, Rabbi Ginsburg is giving over very deep concepts in the most simple way that he can. So what's behind this? Why is he saying that Sinai is the lowest of the mountains? So there's a Midrash that all of the mountains of the area wanted to be the one on which God would give the Torah. And he chose Sinai because it was in a certain way, the lowest of all of the mountains. Now, until this day, no one is absolutely sure which is Mount Sinai. There are many different ideas and speculation. Probably the most famous one is in the Sinai Desert. And I had the great privilege of going there in 1979 when it was still part of Israel. And then we returned it to Egypt. And again, even though no one can prove it, I have to say when I was there, it really felt like it. It was a very moving, spiritual, mystical experience. And I climbed to the top of the mountain, and it wasn't a particularly hard climb. And it didn't, I can't remember, maybe 2 hours to get to the top. But when you're at the top of the mountain, even though it's a very, what Rav Ginsburg called a humble hill, you can see in 360 degrees, like it seems like forever. It is the tallest mountain in that area, and you just see these rolling mountains in every direction, almost forever. It was a very mystical experience. But here, Rav Ginsburg is just really bringing the Midrash that Sinai was chosen because it was the lowest of the mountains, and from that we're supposed to learn that in order to learn Torah, integrate Torah, we have to be humble. Okay, and page 115 for those who have the book. So the first thing Rav Ginsburg says, and then he carries on in the first Torah, but this one sentence is very profound. He just says simply, The Torah is the genetic code of the Jewish soul. I'll say that again. The Torah is the genetic code of the Jewish soul. So what, I'm going to read the next little Torah also, because he explains a little bit. So he says, a Jewish soul is a letter in the Torah scroll. What does he mean? We have a tradition that there are 600,000 root souls in Israel. So someone might ask, well, I think there's like 14 or 15 million Jews in the world. How can there only be 600,000 root souls? It's because every root soul could have hundreds or thousands of souls connected to it. And we're told these same souls, which is us, reincarnate generation after generation. Along with this, we have a tradition that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. So when Rav Ginsburg says a Jewish soul is a letter in the Torah scroll, it's because we have a tradition that the 600,000 letters correspond to the 600,000 root souls in the Torah. Rav Ginsburg continues, the Hebrew word for letter is an ot. The letters are otiot. Ot also means a sign or a miracle. When a soul connects to its source in the Torah, it can work miracles. The Torah is the Jewish soul's genetic code. Every letter in the Torah is a portal for revealing all the other letters. Every Jewish soul reflects all other souls. So, truthfully, we could do a whole class based on what he's trying to give over here in just a few words. So let's delve into it a little bit. So when he says the Torah is the genetic code of the Jewish soul, so in a certain way, this is very connected to a well-known, it's actually in the Talmud, that when a fetus is in its mother's womb, an angel comes and teaches it the entire Torah. And there is a candle lit. Again, this is a Midrash, which means we're talking in symbolic, allegorical, metaphorical language. And there is a candle lit in the womb. This is connected to the verse, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of a human being. And so we're told that after the angel teaches the fetus the entire Torah, right before it's born, it comes and it touches the baby right here. And that is we'll call it the cleft in the lip. And the baby forgets everything. So the obvious question is, well, if that is part of the plan to touch the baby so it forgets the whole Torah, so what was the point of teaching it the entire Torah? And so the answer is that the Torah is inscribed on the unconscious level of a Jewish soul. When they're born, they maybe have no conscious memory of it, but you can ask really thousands and thousands of Jews who were not raised particularly religiously or not at all, and many stories of people who didn't even know they were Jewish until their later teens or early adulthood. And when exposed to Torah ideas, the reaction of so many people was, this is familiar. I know this in my soul, in my gut. I've heard this before. It's familiar to me. So when Rav Ginsburg says the Torah is the genetic code of the Jewish soul, this Midrash is trying to tell us that the Torah is inscribed just like the DNA code. It appears in virtually every cell of the body, and all living things have their DNA code. And here, the deepest DNA code, not on a physical level, but on a spiritual level, is the Torah. The Torah is the genetic code of the Jewish soul. It's a very, very deep idea. And then he says, when a soul connects to its source in the Torah, it can work miracles, because every soul has its letter in the Torah. So I'll share something I know I've shared before, but this is the right time to share it again, is the very first Torah that I ever wrote was based on one letter in the Torah. It was a particular letter that I felt very, very, very connected to. For those who have Orchard of Delights, Fruits of the Orchard, also Seasons of the Soul, you'll see I write about the small aleph of the word Vayikra, the beginning of the book of Leviticus. I write, and this was the first Torah I ever wrote down. So this idea, and I wrote it down because of my deep feeling of connection to this letter. And if you would read these Torahs that I wrote, you'll see what he says when he says, every letter in the Torah is a portal for revealing all the other letters. In other words, this letter at the time and for many years after, and really to this day, was my entrance into connecting to every other letter in the Torah. And so the idea is everyone has their letter in the Torah. Not everyone has the same kind of feeling that I had, that they can actually pinpoint, this is my letter. Nonetheless, the concept, even though it sounds very spiritual and mystical, is saying something very, very deep about the soul, that we are connected to the Torah. I'll just add here, there's this concept in the Talmud, and it's expanded, that everyone has a favorite mitzvah. And this mitzvah is like the deepest connection to all the other mitzvah. And so I can share that even though I love all of the mitzvot, if I had to identify the mitzvah that touches me in the deepest way, is shaking lulav on Sukkot. This mitzvah is, I put tremendous effort into fulfilling this mitzvah with my whole heart and soul. And again, if you look in Seasons of the Soul, I write extensively in the section on Sukkot about shaking lulav and the different meditations that we can have while shaking the lulav. So this is what Rav Ginsburg is really getting to here, is this idea of how deeply the Torah is engraved, just like we are a product of our DNA code. In other words, what makes me different from all of you is the color of my eyes and how tall I am, and just everything is in the DNA code. So it's the same thing with the Torah. But ultimately, it means connecting to the Torah. In other words, if we don't connect to the Torah, then all of this is dormant. Just like many people don't even know that they have DNA or anything about it. Understand, you don't have to know anything about it. But here with the Torah, you do need to know. You need to connect in a certain way. I want to add one other thing. I remember at the time when I learned this, I was, I'll use the expression, I almost fell off my chair to try to express like how incredible hearing this was. Rav Ginsburg once taught the following: the word for a human being is Adam. Aleph, Daled, Mem. And many times we divide the word into its two syllables. Dam. The A is the letter Aleph, and it equals 1. Dam means blood. It represents the body. The Aleph represents the soul. And so there, and Dam equals 44. So an Adam, a human being, is a combination of soul and body. And it's in the word itself. It's in a certain way, the concept that I just said comes out of the very letters. That's how all of Torah works. The concepts come from the letters themselves. That's why Rav Ginsburg says, when a soul connects to its source in the Torah, it can work miracles. Once one understands the secret of the Hebrew language and the holiness of the letters and how they can open up the portal of the soul, it can work miracles. But back to Adam. So Rav Ginsburg says that the word Dam equals 44. And we know that we have 22 pairs of chromosomes. 22 times 2 equals 44, Dam. But we really have, there's a 23rd chromosome, which is either X or Y. That determines the sex. So you don't get both. You get either X or Y, you only get one of them. That's the Aleph. So Rav Ginsburg said, and Adam, the Aleph is the 1, which determines the sex, male or female. And the Dam is the 44, which are the 22 pairs of chromosomes. I remember when I first learned this, I was just flabbergasted. I was just like, wow. That's all I can say is wow. Okay, we're going to move on. So we're still on page 115. And Rav Ginsburg says this is called Miracles, Redemption, and Torah. As the Jewish people left Egypt, the Torah describes them as the army of God. Tsevaot Hashem. Tsevaot means host. One of the names of God, there's 2 names of God that have Tsevaot. Hashem Tsevaot and Elokim Tsevaot, which we translate as the God of hosts. The God of hosts. But here in the Torah, the Jewish people were called the hosts of Hashem, the Tzavakot Hashem. To be redeemed from exile, we must become an army with a commander-in-chief. So when we talk about the army of God, so he says, at a practical level, we need to have an army and we have to have a commander-in-chief. So who is our commander-in-chief? So here he says, really, it's really God is the commander-in-chief, but here he says the commander-in-chief is Moses. Every generation has its own commander-in-chief, the extension of Moses in that generation. He performs miracles, redeems us, and gives us the Torah. So this is based on the tradition given over in the Zohar that the soul of Moshe reincarnates in every generation. Every generation has a reincarnation, or we'll say it, the spark of Moshe reincarnates in every generation. And it reincarnates in a leader of the generation, or one of the great rabbis of the generation, one of the great mystics, or it could even be in the leader of the army. But the soul of Moshe reappears in every generation. And he's like the leader of the generation. It's a whole other explanation of why that happens, how it happens. But that will leave to the side for right now. Rav Ginsburg continues, according to the Baal Shem Tov's process of submission, separation, and sweetening. Now, hopefully everyone remembers that we've learned this many, many, many times. This teaching from the Baal Shem Tov that every process goes through 3 stages, whether it's a physical process or a spiritual process. What he calls submission, separation, and sweetening. So here and it can be interpreted almost infinitely to any process. So here he says that the miracles that Moshe performed when we came out of Egypt, they are meant to subdue our ego. In other words, in the face of God's miracles, it makes us understand the relationship that we have with the one doing the miracles, God. Redemption separates us from identifying with exile. In other words, to go out of Egypt. So first of all, I'll just add that the slavery in Egypt was the submission. Quite literally, a slave has to submit to its master. The whole Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. We had to submit to our taskmasters. To get out of exile, that is Havdalah, that's separation. To go from slavery to freedom is a process of separating ourselves from the slave mentality and entering into a new consciousness called freedom. And the Torah sweetens the hardship of our journey. 50 days after we come out of Egypt, we receive the Torah and Sinai. That is called the sweetening. So again, the slavery and the miracles that happened to get us out of slavery, this is submission, hachna'ah. The process of leaving Egypt and separating ourselves from exile and slavery to a new reality called freedom, that is called Havdalah, separation. And receiving the Torah is the sweetening. That is what gives us the tools, what he says, that to sweeten the hardships of our journey. And of course, this is talking about each and every person. Every soul that comes down to a body is like the Jewish people going down into Egypt. Every soul that grows spiritually and matures and comes into their own and figures out what they're doing in this world is a process of separation, of clarification. And then ultimately, fulfilling one's purpose in this world. And for a Jew, that means ultimately, through our connection to Torah, that is the sweetening of the journey. So we've learned this idea of three-pronged process many, many, many times. But this is like a classic one of how the Jewish people got from slavery to freedom, exile to redemption, through these three stages, and how each person goes through the same process in their lives. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Okay, continuing on page 116. This is called the Oral Torah. The Oral Torah comprises the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Midrash. And then he puts in parentheses, Kabbalah is considered part of the Midrash. And then he says a very interesting thing here. I think I heard this once, but when I read it in preparation, it was very interesting. He says that the Zohar's original title was Midrash Yehi Or, the Midrash of Let There Be Light. Now, the Zohar means illumination. That's what the word Zohar means, is to illuminate. So he says that the original name, or maybe a conceived name for the Zohar, was Midrash Yehi Or. So he's just pointing out that when we talk about the Oral Torah, now this is what we'll call the primary sources of the Oral Torah. The Oral Torah has never stopped. Every book that is written, every class that is given, every discussion between two people, any thought of a Torah idea that comes into an individual's mind is all part of the Oral Torah. But the primary sources are the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Midrash. Now he's going to connect it once again to the Baal Shem Tov's three-part process. The states of mind required to learn these three parts of the Oral Torah correspond to submission, separation, and sweetening, the three-stage spiritual process taught by the Baal Shem Tov. The Mishnah demands we submit to its laws and regulations. Before the Mishnah, there was nothing written. It was truly an oral Torah. For literally 1,500 years from the time of the giving of the Torah at Sinai to when Yehuda Nasi composed the Mishnah is 1,500 years. Now, just to put that in perspective, America just celebrated 250 years. Here we're talking about not even all of Jewish history. We're talking about a little more than a third of Jewish history. But nothing was written down. So when he says that the Mishnah demands we submit to its laws and regulations, this was the first attempt to begin to write down the legal structure of Judaism. And that requires a state of submission, because ultimately a person has to decide whether they're going to submit themselves to the commandments in the Torah or not. It's a decision. But to decide to submit, that means, like, for real, I'm taking upon myself whatever the mitzvah is to keep kosher. No one's standing there with a gun telling me, like, you have to do this. That's why he's saying this is accepting Jewish law upon oneself is an act of submission. The Gemara constantly requires making logical separations and divisions. So this is so astute, what Rav Ginsburg is saying. Gemara, anyone who has studied Gemara, it is like the highest level of, I'm using the vernacular, like nitpicking every nuance, every subtlety within a logical system of thought. And that is what some separation is. To clarify. Separation also means to clarify. What is the Gemara doing? The Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah is like Morse code. It's very, very concise, short, to the point, and it needs to be fleshed out. That's what the Gemara does. That's what the Gemara does. The Gemara is approximately 2,100 pages of discussion on the Mishnah. But the process is a process of clarifying, of separating between permitted and not permitted, pure and impure, good and not good, etc., holy and profane, etc. Finally, the Midrash is full of stories that reveal the Torah's inner spiritual dimension, where all the apparent severity is sweetened. In other words, learning the inner dimensions of the Torah, including the Midrash and the Zohar and Kabbalah, the Arizal, the Baal Shem Tov, and onwards and onwards. This is a process of sweetening reality. So if I'm sure everyone has thought about this many, many times, especially now during the 9 days, that we seriously ask ourselves, how did the Jewish people hang on through everything we went through? The oppression, the slaughter, the exiles, the slaveries, the destructions are so like in your face and dramatic. How did we as a people have the strength to continue? It's a question that we should all ask. But there's many different answers, but I'm just trying to relate it to what he just said, where he says that the Torah's inner spiritual dimension, where all the apparent severity is sweetened, is because learning Torah, keeping the mitzvot, and a Jewish lifestyle is extremely rewarding and pleasurable and life-giving. And so in the midst of all of this oppression, Jews continued to keep the mitzvot and to learn Torah. And the keeping of the mitzvot and learning Torah was such a sweetening, it was able to sweeten this very, very harsh outer reality. Like I said, there are other answers to this question. How is it that we survived as a people? But this is a very important one. And it's very, very, very down to earth. Very down to earth. That despite it all, the commitment, but also the pleasure of keeping Shabbat and all the holidays and prayer and doing the mitzvah gave people life and purpose. And it gave us as a people a commitment to continue as Jews. Okay, now we go to page 117. Now he says like this: how much Torah do you know? With a question mark. A drop in the ocean? No, you know nothing. Finite is nothing compared to the infinite. So here we have to understand that, like, behind this is a little bit of I call it pure mathematics. We have to remember that Rav Ginsburg has a master's in higher mathematics. But what he's saying here is finite is nothing compared to the infinite. So I'm not positive I know exactly what Rav Ginsburg means here, but when I was preparing, what came to my mind is the following. We have, I'm sure everyone knows, this concept called Batal B'Shishim, something being nullified in 60 parts. What's the classic example that everyone's probably heard? That if you have a big pot of meat cooking on your stove, and by accident, one of your children drops a drop or two of milk into the meat mixture, well, we know from the Torah that we don't mix meat and milk. So we might think you have to throw the whole thing out. But it's explained that there's this concept called nullified in 60 parts. So if it's less than 1 in 60, so the smaller quantity is nullified. It's as if it's not there. It's nothing. And therefore, I mean, this is a real practical thing. You could eat your meat dish, even though it has, it could be more than a few drops, but as long as it's less than 1 in 60, it's as if it's nothing. So here, when Rav Ginsburg says finite is nothing compared to the infinite, I don't think he means it's like nothing, but it means that it's like nullified in the face of infinity. It becomes nullified, becomes almost one with. So in other words, whatever we know of Torah in a certain way becomes nullified within the infinite wisdom of God. I really like that explanation. Continuing on page 117, it says, this is called 1,000 lights. Isaac gave Jacob 10 blessings. These 10 blessings form an intermediate stage between the 10 utterances of creation and the 10 commandments. Moses received 1,000 lights at Sinai. 1,000 is 10 to the third power. It is the product of meaning 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. 10 to the third power. So he says that 1,000 is the product of the 10 utterances of creation times the 10 blessings that Isaac gave Jacob times the 10 commandments. And that's what Rav Ginsburg says here. So what is behind what he's saying here? So there is a very, very important concept that the 10 utterances of creation are intrinsically linked to the 10 commandments. In other words, the 10 commandments in a certain way is the fulfillment of the very purpose of creation. Creation that came into being through 10 utterances. Those utterances are, and God said, let there be X, and there was X. The first one, of course, is Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or Vayehi Or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So there are 10 of these expressions. Actually, there's 9, but the first verse of the Torah is considered an utterance. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth through speech. And the 10 commandments are a fulfillment of the very purpose of creation. Now, this is something I've written about extensively. People can find it in my various books, the connection between creation and the 10 commandments. But here, there are many different versions of, are there other 10s in the middle? And so many times, the 10 plagues are considered like the middle between them. In other words, for us to come out of Egypt to receive the 10 commandments, it only happened through 10 plagues. Another version is the tradition that Abraham had 10 tests that he passed. And of course, Abraham is an archetypal figure representing all of Israel. And so we have the 10 utterances of creation, Avram passing his 10 tests, and then we merit to receive the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai. But here, Rav Ginsburg is adding a slightly different one. And he's saying that the blessing that Isaac gave to Yaakov contained 10 blessings. I should have prepared this, but give me 1 second. So I want to read you the blessing. The blessing is exactly 10 words. Nonetheless, they learned that from these 10 words come 10 blessings. And here it is. Anyone who wants to look it up, it's Genesis 27, verse 28. Vayiten lecha ha'elokim mital ha'shamayim umishmanei ha'oretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. Actually, the blessing continues, and that's where the 10 come from, but I'll translate. He, meaning God, should give you from the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and great produce of grain and wine. V'yavducha amim v'yishtachavu lecha le'umim, and nations will serve you and will bow down to you. Haveh gevir la'achecha, you will be like a main force for your brother, which was Esav. Bishtachavu lecha b'nei imecha, and the sons of your mother will bow down to you. Orarecha arur u'mevarechecha baruch, and those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed. From all of this comes 10 different blessings. This is like a messianic kind of blessing. And so that's that is what Rav Ginsburg is relating to here. So he says that these 10 blessings, many people say this is the highest blessing in the Torah. There are many blessings in the Torah, but some say that this represents the highest of all of the blessings. And so he's saying that the 10 utterances times the 10 blessings times the 10 commandments equals the 1,000 lights that Moshe got at Sinai. We're told that when we worship the golden calf, these 1,000 lights were taken away. They were hidden. And yet we're told that every Shabbat, we get a glimpse of these 1,000 lights again. That these 1,000 lights of creation, of blessing, and of Sinai are accessible on Shabbat. In the Amida of the morning prayer of Shabbat, the middle part begins Yismach Moshe b'matanat chelko. That Moshe is joyous in the gift of his portion. So people ask, what does that mean? And one of the answers is it means that Moshe, and remember the Alter Rebbe says that every Jew has a spark of Moshe in them. It's not only that Moshe incarnates in a leader of Israel in every generation, but every person has a spark of Moshe, just like the Baal Shem Tov taught that every person has a spark of Mashiach. Well, this goes together because Moshe is Mashiach. The soul of Moshe will be the Mashiach. As it says, Hua Goel Rishon, Hua Goel Acharon. He is the first Redeemer, and he is the last Redeemer. So in the Amida, when it says Yismach Moshe b'matanat chelko, that Moshe is joyous in the gift of his portion. So every Shabbos, when I say this, I think of what Rav Ginsburg is teaching here, that Moshe's portion is these 1,000 lights, meaning that, again, Shabbos is called a remembrance, Zecher Ma'aseh Bereshit, a remembrance of the days of creation, of the works of creation. Every Shabbat, because we observe Shabbat because of the Shabbat of Bereshit, that after 6 days or eras or epochs, however you want to understand it, God rested from his work. That's why we keep Shabbat. It's a remembrance of the first Shabbat, of the days of creation. And so when we say Yismach Moshe, Moshe is joyous. It brings me great joy when I say these words. It's again, you can't just say the words, you have to experience the words. So when you say the words Yismach Moshe b'matanat chelko, we have a chance to experience these 1,000 lights. Very deep idea. Very, very deep idea. No, that's the whole point, that the lights were taken from Moshe, but every Shabbat, as it were, he gets them back, or at least a taste of them. Okay, the next one. A life of learning. This is a beautiful one. The 3 letters of the word echad meaning one, God's unity, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So the word one, the letters form the acronym of the three letters of one are an aleph, a chet, and a dalet. So the first letter, aleph, stands for or, light. The chet stands for chaim, life. And the dalet stands for da'at, knowledge. So in other words, the word one stands for light, life, knowledge. So now Rav Ginsburg is going to explain what this means. So he says, the one God whose first creation and ultimate representation is light, created a tree of life and a tree of knowledge of good and evil. So here, if you remember, in the Torah, each day ends Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom, whatever day. It was evening and it was day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. Only the first day, it doesn't say it was evening and it was morning the first day. It says, Vayhi Erev, Voker, Yom Echad, one day. And from this, we learn that everything that would ever be created was created on the first day. Even more, we learn that everything that was ever created was already created in potential in the first verse. More than that, we learn everything that was ever created was in potential in the first word of the Torah, Bereshit. And then we're told everything that would ever be created is encoded in the first letter of the Torah, the Big Bet. This is what we call the idea of the Big Bang, that everything that would ever be created was present in that first, what's called the singularity. Singularity means oneness. Everything that would ever be created was in a state of unity. And I just mentioned in the Sunday class, I just heard that the newest projection of how many galaxies there are is 1 trillion. Now, I had heard like 10 billion, and of course, you can't even conceive really of the Milky Way. The Milky Way is a bit bigger than we can even really imagine, let alone 100 galaxies, let alone 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000. Now they're actually seriously thinking that there's 1 trillion galaxies, and it was all in that infinitely small speck of whatever it was of the Big Bang. So here, Rav Ginsburg is saying that the word echad is light, life, and knowledge. But he connects it to the creation. I'm going to read it again. The one God, that's the Aleph, whose first creation and ultimate representation is light, created a tree of life and a tree of knowledge of good and evil. This also takes a bit of explanation, the idea that light is the ultimate representation of God in this world. I actually wrote an entire book about this called The Mystical Nature of Light. That physical light is the best example or the best metaphor or the best language that we can use to understand divinity, godliness. And that goes into understanding the physical properties of light and how it connects to God. I'm continuing because I see we're starting to run out of time. So Rav Ginsburg continues, plants transform light into life through photosynthesis. But only humans can transform life into knowledge. Saying something very, very, very deep here. Light, life, and knowledge. So the whole plant kingdom on a daily level is transforming light into life. But only human beings can take life and turn it into knowledge. That's why when God blew into Adam, what's called Nishmat Chayim, the soul of life, and he became a Nefesh Chaya, a speaking soul. Actually, Nefesh Chaya means a living soul, but the Aramaic Onkelos translation is a speaking soul, meaning with knowledge. When Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it didn't automatically give him true knowledge. It only entangled the notions of good and evil in his mind. Transforming life into knowledge ultimately depends on you. So in other words, he ate from the tree of knowledge, but what he got instead, he got a certain type of knowledge, but good and evil became very mixed up intellectually, emotionally, psychologically. To this day, we're all a product of that confusion of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Continuing, every moment of one's life, one has to learn something new to increase one's knowledge just a bit. The bits connect and become a body of knowledge. Life's continual learning process does not necessarily take place in the conscious mind alone. Rather, it occurs in the realm of the unconscious as well. I'm adding words here because I'm sure that's what is meant here. However, the depth of the unconscious learning process depends upon the level of one's involvement in conscious learning. So in other words, we're learning on a conscious level and also an unconscious level. But the unconscious level is fed by, motivated by, directed by our conscious learning. To the degree I devote myself to Torah study, my unconscious mind integrates the teachings I gain from life's experiences. To devote yourself to the study of Torah means to learn in order to act. It requires aligning your will with God's will and clinging to him. So here he adds a few other things. First, we had light, life, and knowledge. But then he's explaining, well, what do you do with that knowledge? Is having a body of knowledge, what are you going to do with it? So that's what he says. To devote yourself to the study of Torah means to learn in order to act. This is an important discussion throughout Jewish history, is the importance of acting. And the term that's used in the Gemara is Hamaaseh hu ha'ikar. The acting is the main thing. In other words, you can learn about Jewish philosophy, Jewish mysticism. You can even learn about the mitzvot, the depths of the mitzvot, the inner dimensions of the mitzvot. But the question is, are you doing it? And if you're not doing it, you have a body of knowledge. There's no doubt about it. But in Jewish tradition, that body of knowledge must be translated into action. And I'll end with really one of my favorite teachings from Rav Ginsburg will go back to the word Adam. So Rav Ginsburg says that the three letters of Adam, yes, we're on page 118. The 3 pages of Adam, the Aleph stands for Emuna, faith. The Daled stands for Da'at, knowledge. And the Mem stands for Ma'aseh, action. So Rav Ginsburg explains very simply that this is like the formula for life. That first we have to have a certain level of faith. Faith in God, faith in ourselves, faith in humanity, faith in believing I'm here for a reason, faith in my chosen mission in this world, many levels of faith. So that's the Aleph of Adam. And then the Daled is knowledge. We have to take our faith and translate it into knowledge, meaning that we don't believe in blind faith. Faith has to be based on knowledge. That's why when we say that the Shema is the cardinal statement of faith in Judaism, well, the answer is that's correct, but we'll notice that in the Shema, there are 2 large letters, an ayin of Shema and a daled of Echad. It's the only verse in the Torah that has 2 large letters in one verse. So if you take those 2 letters, ayin and daled, it spells aid, witness. So this is telling us that when we say the Shema Yisrael, it's telling us what our mission in the world is. It's to be witnesses of the oneness of God. This was Abraham's mission, and it is our mission to this day. The spread of the knowledge and faith of one God. But if you take the letters ayin and daled and you reverse them, it spells da, to know. So it's not just faith. Our faith is based on everything that I see in knowledge. And then the last letter of Adam is a mem, which stands for ma'aseh, action. That's why Judaism is very action directed. That's the secret of all the mitzvot, are not just that we do the mitzvot. It teaches us to act in the world. Virtually all the mitzvot have to do with a physical action, a physical object, or speech. And speech is considered an action. And so by doing the mitzvot, it trains us to act in the world, not just do the mitzvot. It's a training for how to act in the world. So that's just a beautiful understanding of Adam. Emuna, faith, being based on daled, knowledge, dat, and then carried into ma'aseh, action. May we all be blessed to have that kind of emuna, to have lots of dat, and to be motivated and inspired to bring that faith and knowledge into the world to make it a better world. We need a better world quickly.